What if I told you there's a valley in Canada where men have been found without their heads? A pit on a tiny island that has swallowed treasure hunters, millions of dollars, and 6 human lives for over 2 centuries, and still hasn't given up its secret. A crater so massive, it looks like the Earth's own eye, staring back at satellites from orbit. A copper mine older than the pyramids, where 200,000 tons of metal simply vanished, and 2 royal warships lost in the Arctic ice with 129 men aboard, found only after 170 years. And what was found on the bones of the crew will disturb you. These are not legends. These are documented, investigated, and in some cases, still actively unexplained. 5 places, 1 country the world thinks it already knows. By the end of this video, you'll never look at Canada the same way again. Most people picture Canada as calm, predictable, and quiet. Polite people, cold winters, endless empty land. But underneath that quiet reputation is a country sitting on the staggering wealth and staggering secrets. Let's start with the wealth. Canada is one of the richest nations on Earth in natural resources. After Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, Canada holds the 3rd largest proven oil reserves on the planet. And the vast majority of that oil sits in the oil sands of Alberta. Crude oil, natural gas, minerals like potash and uranium, forestry products stretching across millions of acres. Together, these exports form the backbone of the Canadian economy, keeping it consistently ranked among the world's top 10 economies, and a permanent seat at the table of the G7. Now picture the scale this wealth sits inside. Canada is the 2nd largest country on Earth by land area, stretching across nearly 10 million square kilometers. Yet it's home to just over 40 million people. That means enormous stretches of this country are almost completely empty. Forests with no roads, mountains with no names on a map, Arctic coastline that no human has ever set foot on. It's inside that emptiness, that silence, where these 5 places have been sitting, mostly unnoticed by the rest of the world, for centuries. Let's start with the one that still, to this day, nobody wants to spend the night in. Deep in Canada's Northwest Territories, there's a valley Indigenous peoples refuse to enter after dark for generations. Today, mapmakers still call it by the name prospectors gave it in fear: the Valley of the Headless Men. In 1908, 2 brothers, Willie and Frank McLeod, went into Nahanni Valley searching for gold. They never came back. When search parties finally found their remains, both brothers' skeletons were missing their heads. No heads were ever recovered. No explanation was ever confirmed. And they weren't the last. Over the following decades, more gold seekers vanished entirely, and others were found dead under circumstances nobody could fully explain. Wolves were blamed, rockfalls were blamed, but locals whispered a different explanation, one that had existed long before any prospector ever arrived. But Nahanni isn't only a graveyard of unanswered questions. It's also a landscape that defies logic in ways you can actually see. Inside the park sits Virginia Falls, a waterfall that drops approximately 96 meters, nearly double the height of Niagara Falls. Most people have never even heard its name. And in 1978, Nahanni National Park Reserve became one of the very first natural sites on Earth to be inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, placed in the same founding class as the Galapagos Islands. Here's where it gets stranger. In the middle of this subarctic wilderness, where winter temperatures regularly plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius, there are natural hot springs that never freeze. Krause Hot Springs bubbles year-round, sustaining a pocket of rare plant life that has no business surviving this far north. A warm, living pocket, surrounded on all sides by a landscape that should kill anything that lingers too long. And then there's the story that gave the valley its fear in the first place, long before the MacLeod brothers ever arrived. Indigenous DNA oral traditions describe a group known as the Naha, a fierce, elusive mountain people who would strike settlements in surprise nighttime raids and then vanish completely, leaving no trail, no camp, no physical trace behind. And then, at some point in history, the traditions don't specify. They stopped appearing entirely. No graves, no abandoned villages, no records outside of oral memory, just a name, passed down as a warning. So ask yourself, what happened to two grown men whose heads were never found? What happened to a people who existed clearly enough to be remembered, but vanished completely enough to leave nothing behind? Nahanni Valley still doesn't have an answer for either question. If a valley that erases heads and entire peoples sounds unsettling, wait until you hear about the pit that has been swallowing men, machines, and millions of dollars for over 200 years, and is still winning. In 1795, 3 teenage boys were exploring a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia when they noticed something strange. An unnatural depression in the ground, and above it, an old ship's tackle block hanging from a tree branch, as if something heavy had once been lowered down. They started digging. What they found should not have been possible for teenagers with shovels to uncover by accident. Layers of oak platforms placed with deliberate mechanical precision every 3 meters, roughly every 10 feet, like flooring installed by someone who had engineered this shaft on purpose. This wasn't a natural hole. This was construction. Then, at around 30 meters deep, the diggers hit something that has defeated every expedition since. An elaborate, man-made flood tunnel connected directly to the ocean began filling the shaft with seawater the moment excavation reached a certain depth. Not a natural leak. A trap. Engineered by someone who understood tidal hydraulics well enough to build a system that activates only when water is pumped out, punishing anyone who dares to go too deep. For over 2 centuries, treasure hunters have thrown everything at this pit. Pumps, divers, industrial drilling rigs, modern engineering firms. Millions of dollars have been spent trying to beat a trap built with 18th century tools, or earlier. At least 6 people have died trying. And even with today's heaviest machinery, nobody has ever successfully broken through to the bottom. Modern ground-penetrating radar has only deepened the mystery. Scans below 40 meters have confirmed complex voids and artificial channels. Structures that shouldn't exist naturally, arranged with an internal logic that modern engineers still can't fully map. The hydraulic system appears designed with an almost impossible level of foresight. It doesn't trigger from digging. It triggers specifically when water is pumped out, as if the builders somehow anticipated exactly how future treasure hunters would try to beat them. Think about that for a second. Whoever built this didn't just dig a hole and hide something. They engineered a defense system calibrated to defeat a method of extraction that wouldn't even exist for another century. So who had that level of engineering knowledge? On a remote Canadian island, centuries before modern hydraulics were formalized as a science. Nobody knows. Every decade, a new team arrives with new technology, certain they'll finally be the ones to solve it. And every decade, the island reminds them who's really in control. If a 200-year-old puzzle that has beaten modern engineering doesn't deserve a subscribe, I don't know what does. Hit subscribe now, because what's coming up next is even harder to explain. A crater so massive, it looks like the Earth itself is staring back at you from space. We've seen a valley that erases people, and a pit that defeats every machine sent to break it. Now let's go look at something you can actually see from orbit. A wound in the planet that's over 200 million years old.
If you look at satellite images of northern Quebec, there's one shape that stops people scrolling immediately. A near-perfect circle of water, 72 kilometers wide, ringed by ice and rock like an iris around a pupil. Locals call it the Eye of Quebec. From space, it genuinely looks like the planet is looking back at you. But this isn't a lake that formed naturally over time. It's a scar. Around 214 million years ago, near the end of the Triassic period, an asteroid roughly 5 kilometers wide slammed into the ancient supercontinent, Pangaea, at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. The impact released energy on a scale almost impossible to comprehend, and left behind a massive ring-shaped crater that has survived more than 2 full ice ages. In 1968, engineers built the Daniel Johnson Dam, merging the crater's rivers together and flooding the ancient impact site into the almost perfect ring you see today. Humans didn't create this shape. They just filled in a wound the planet already had. And the strangeness doesn't stop at its shape. Around the crater, compasses behave erratically, spinning, drifting, refusing to settle, due to localized magnetic anomalies in the impact rock. Satellite thermal imaging has shown that the water near the crater's central island stays unusually warm, even in the middle of brutal Canadian winters. And long before satellites existed, indigenous oral traditions in the region already warned against grazing livestock near the crater's edge at night. A quarter-billion-year-old impact site that animals and instruments still seem to react to today. Now let's go even further back in time, to a mystery that isn't about what fell from the sky, but what disappeared from the ground. Around Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula, on the shores of Lake Superior, archaeologists have documented over 10,000 ancient mining pits. They're more than 6,000 years old, meaning they were dug long before the Bronze Age even began. And here's the part that should be impossible. These Stone Age miners excavated bedrock shafts up to 180 meters deep without a single bronze or iron tool. Their method was brutally simple but effective. They built intense fires directly against the rock face, superheated the stone, then doused it with cold water. The thermal shock cracked the bedrock apart, exposing pure natural copper nuggets underneath. Now here's the number that has archaeologists genuinely stuck. Estimates suggest more than 200,000 tons of high-grade copper were extracted from these mines. But across the entire North American continent, every dig site, every museum, every collection, archaeologists have only ever accounted for less than 7,000 tons of that copper in finished tools and artifacts. That leaves hundreds of thousands of tons of ancient copper completely unaccounted for. No mass graves full of it, no hidden warehouses, no trade records. It simply isn't there. So where did it go? Some isotope analyses have found traces matching Lake Superior copper inside. Bronze Age artifacts recovered from the Mediterranean, thousands of kilometers away. It's a claim that remains fiercely debated. Coincidence? Or evidence of transatlantic trade routes millennia before anyone thought that was possible? Nobody has an answer that satisfies everyone. A crater from space and a missing mountain of ancient metal. Both mysteries locked in rock and ice. But the final story isn't buried underground at all. It happened in open Arctic water to some of the most advanced explorers of their century. And it ended in a way nobody in Britain ever expected. In 1845, 2 ships of the British Royal Navy, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, sailed into the Canadian Arctic, carrying 129 men. They were the most advanced polar exploration vessels of their time. Steam-assisted engines, reinforced ice-breaking hulls, and years' worth of preserved food supplies. Leading them was Sir John Franklin, one of the most experienced polar officers in the entire British Navy. Their mission: chart the longsword Northwest Passage. In Britain, almost nobody doubted they would succeed. 2 years later, both ships had vanished. No wreckage, no distress signal, no survivors reaching civilization, just silence. What followed became one of the largest search operations of the 19th century. Dozens of expeditions combed the Arctic over the following years, funded by private wealth and government resources alike. Slowly, fragments of the truth began surfacing. notes, abandoned equipment, and human remains bearing marks that silenced investigators for decades. Modern forensic analysis of the recovered bones revealed something disturbing. Dangerously high levels of lead in the crew's remains, most likely from poorly soldered tin cans supplied by an unreliable contractor. Slow poisoning on top of starvation and hypothermia. But that explanation alone didn't account for everything investigators found. Cut marks on some of the recovered bones pointed to something far darker. Cannibalism in the crew's final, desperate weeks. For generations, Inuit oral traditions had already described exactly this. Groups of exhausted white sailors, dragging heavy lifeboats across the ice, some too weak to even speak, collapsing one after another in the snow. For over a century, those accounts were dismissed by British investigators. Archaeology later proved the Inuit had been right all along. Then, in 2014 and 2016, Parks Canada finally located both wrecks resting on the freezing Arctic seafloor, remarkably preserved, almost frozen in time for a century and a half. Underwater footage revealed crew quarters, dishware, and personal belongings still neatly arranged, as if the men fully expected to return for them. The only written record ever recovered from the crew was a short note found on King William Island in 1859. It confirmed the ships had been abandoned in the ice and that the survivors were attempting to walk toward the Canadian mainland. After that note, the trail goes completely cold. No graves, no camps, not one man ever reached safety. What turns trained, disciplined Royal Navy officers into men who resort to eating each other to survive? Poisoning explains part of it, but some researchers believe the deeper cause was psychological. The crushing weight of endless polar darkness, total isolation, and the slow realization that no rescue was ever coming. To this day, Parks Canada strictly limits access to both wreck sites, and many of the recovered artifacts remain closed to public study. A valley that takes heads and leaves no trace, a pit that has defeated every machine sent to break it for 2 centuries, a crater from deep space still warm after 214 million years, a copper mine older than the pyramids, missing hundreds of thousands of tons of metal, and an Arctic expedition that ended in starvation, poison, and cannibalism just beneath the ice. 5 places, 5 unanswered questions, all hiding behind a reputation the entire world got wrong. Maybe Canada was never boring. Maybe the world just never looked past the surface. If this video kept you watching until the very end, you already know there's more out there. Subscribe and I'll take you to the next place the world overlooked.